This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
If the universe, the planet, life, and every product of the process of creation is miraculous beyond comprehension, then what does that make the very process itself? Can you create a process of creation? And what is there to know about it beyond you? Then you'll notice that your perception of the process of creation is that the process itself is miraculous beyond comprehension. It encourages the process to flourish, or loves the creation just because it exists, not for what it does, achieves, or doesn't. It just encourages the process to flourish, loves the process itself, whatever happens. Valeria Teles interviews David Bhakti Gotlieb, the author of Healing Inner Conflict, the purpose behind behaviors we regret and what to do about it. David Bhakti Gotlieb brings a lifetime of experience to his counseling, supervision, and professional development workshops. He has a Master's of Applied Science in Critical Psychology, a Graduate Diploma in Ecology, UWS, ACA College of Supervision. He has worked as a youth worker for Sydney City Missions Wilderness Program, Burnside's Adolescent Program, 10 years as a family support worker, 7 years running personal development programs for corrective services, and 10 years developing and running a partners support group at Westmead Hospital's Breast Cancer Institute. He is trained with Dr. Richard Alpert, a.k.a. Ram Dass, Be Here Now, How Can I Help? Dr. Arnie Mendel, Process-Oriented Psychology, Working on Yourself Alone, Sitting in the Fire. Helena Cornelius, Conflict Resolution Network, Everyone Can Win. He has been seeing private clients for 40 years, and through his work with extreme states of dissociation, has developed Healing Inner Conflict, HIC, which is a simple method for understanding and intervening effectively with the mechanisms that manifest as disturbing behaviors. While he is retiring soon from face-to-face counseling, David will still be offering all forms of supervision services to counselors, psychologists, psychotherapists, youth and social workers, and other practitioners in the helping professions, as well as trainings in Healing Inner Conflict, HIC. Meet David at healinginnerconflict.com.au. Here is the interview with David Bhakti Gotlieb.
In your own words, who is David Bhakti Gotlieb?
He's a composite of human and spiritual. I guess, I was born like everybody else, went through the fundamentalism of being brought up in a kind of a conservative Jewish family of its time, and, head down, bottom up, and do your study and make something of your life. And then my brother suicided when I was about 22, and I think that kind of propelled me, even though I didn't realize it at the time, into that's not necessarily the way to go. He'd got into financial trouble, and he was very focused on, the whole big business and make money, and that turned things around. In a counselling session with my brother, who I was in business with, and the counsellor said, well, I think people come here to do whatever they need to do, and when they're finished, they go. And I said to the counsellor very sceptically, well, I'd like to believe that, but I don't. And but he just looked at me and he said, well, what makes you believe what you believe? And I had no idea. Like, that cracked me. It was part of an organisation that taught meditation and did personal development, and I kind of just did everything and learned everything, became a meditation teacher, became a personal development teacher, and ended up studying with Ken Keyes Jr. in Oregon. And it was through him that I met Ram Dass, and then through Ram Dass ended up with a relationship with Neem Karoli Baba, and that's what brought unconditional love kind of as a possibility into my life, even though, it happened over a long time. And I guess that's influenced my work, not particularly consciously. I think it was just eventually noticing that over the decades, the way that I worked, I noticed, oh my God, this is actually teaching people how to be able to look at what's going on from an unconditionally loving perspective that's I couldn't have done if he hadn't have modeled it for me. I wouldn't have known what it was.
Let me ask, actually, before I ask you more questions, the opening questions, what does Bhakti mean, for those who don't know?
The whole name is Bhakti. The Das family is Ram Dass and Krishna Das and Rameshwar Das. And so these, 30 years after having met Ram Dass and begun a process of, I would just say, kind of ensconcing myself in, I guess, what I'd call ways of developing unconditional love. And I think somewhat just by doing things and listening to things and trying to get my focus to be able to at least go back to that when I lose it. After about 30 years of that, Ram Dass was offering Skype sessions with people, and I thought, well, I really want to thank him for what he brought back from India with Baba's, I don't know, I could only call it really a contact high of unconditional love that he then put into Be Here Now and Be Loved Now and everything else. So I had the Skype session with him, and ended. He said, look, if you're in Maui, you can look me up, which I didn't need more than that, and ended up doing that. And when we were with him, I had the thought that I'd kind of dedicated my life to service about, 7 or 8 years before that. And I just thought, well, I wouldn't mind a name. So he was the one who gave me Bhakti Das, and it means servant of devotional love, which, interestingly enough, like David Gottlieb, what I was born with, is beloved of God, God love. So I really haven't gone very far, but I've just gone around the corner.
It makes so much sense to me, David, that we are never far from the truth of unconditional love. It's just that it's also the conditionings and the getting lost, per se. It's also part of that unconditional love. Everything is connected. 1, 2, 3. The 1 and 2 is happening at the same time. There's no separation, really. That was a very interesting thing to talk about. It's fun that there's no separation, none. It seems like it's just apparent. It cannot be separated. Everything, it's that, which is, I call it unconditional love.
Yeah, look, for me, that stuff is a bit like I don't know, the sun's always there, but sometimes you're not looking at it. Sometimes you're looking for it, but it's a completely overcast day and you can't see it. But, it's a bit like someone who's never seen the ocean. It's hard for them to imagine it. But if you know the sun's there, there's never any doubt that above the clouds it's still there, or even if you're in your bedroom and the windows are completely closed, there's still a sense, but the sun's still there. And like for me, especially in my work, it's like, when most people are coming, they're not coming with any relationship to unconditional love. They're coming with their inability to experience that. And so the very thing that you and I are doing is trying to put language to an experience. On a certain level, we kind of have the privilege of having it to talk to from the start. But often when I'm, working with someone, they don't have that grace. And I think that's why finding language to span between no relationship to it to some relationship to it is, I think that's the evolution we're in.
Evolution, that's another interesting word. And let me ask you another question related to that, I guess. From your perspective, what is freedom or liberation? What would that look like?
Well, the interesting thing with the question is, having talked about choice and choicelessness, is from which perspective do I answer it?
Right.
But of course, I'm going to answer it from both perspectives.
Yeah.
If we start from the position of unconditional love, everything is freedom. But do we experience that? No, we experience limitation. As soon as we're in a body, we're experiencing limitation. Almost everything that our body is a filtering system so that we don't hear all of the sounds and we don't see all of the spectrum.
Right.
Because we don't have the ability, we'd pop if we did. And so on a certain level, as we enter into an incarnation, we're entering into limitation, which is why then, when you get a glimpse of, I am actually the totality of everything and in my essence, then there's this thing of, okay, so what's this incarnation? What's this body? For me, freedom is experiencing that oneness with everything, knowing that, this body is a piece of flotsam and jetsam just bobbing up and down on the great ocean of existence, and at the same time not having any issue with the fact that I'm living in a 63-year-old body that has its things it can do and things that it can't do, but actually seeing that as part of the totality of the freedom to experience 63 years in a body and be able to, talk to my children and from the point of view of their experience, which is, I'm not doing so well with my desire to become this or that, and be able to have compassion for limitation because I know what that's like myself, but without being out of relationship with the freedom of being in relationship with love as the binding force of the universe. So freedom for me is kind of the seesaw between my mortal life and my unconditional life that sees the whole picture and my incarnation as part of it.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Which has been said in some spiritual tradition, being in the middle. I think it's Zen Buddhism. They talk a lot about that middle way. just being between, dancing between those two, the is and the isn't.
Well, I think, with Jesus has said, I'm in it, but not of it. And I remember, I think it was a Muslim saying, I go through the market, but I'm not buying anything.
Yeah. I like that one. I actually love that one. Never heard that way, David.
A long time ago, I was listening to some channelings of someone called Chung Fu, who said the sage walks through the battlefield without noticing anything going on. He's just walking through. And I think that's our lives. We walk through all of the givens of our incarnation. And if we're lucky, we get beyond to be able to see that the incarnation is just a evolution that's both physical, but that allows the possibility of something spiritual. If we didn't have a body, you and I wouldn't be having this chat.
Yeah, so you do believe in reincarnation, in mind continuation, or the continuation of the me, the I?
On a certain level, I'm not even sure it matters what I believe. Because, there's the part of me that was brought up with all of this stuff is, so non-empirically provable and whatever. So the very basis of what we're talking about, where we're saying, okay, so I experienced this thing called unconditional love, or I am unconditional love, but it's predicated on having that experience. But how do I know that my experience is your experience, is anyone else's experience? But that for me is the divine play of talking about the experience of life while you're having it. All I know is that I couldn't have had this chat with you when I was 15 or 7, and that it's not particularly linear. We grow physically linearly, we go from childhood to puberty to adulthood and whatever. But spiritually, it kind of happens whenever it happens, which makes it kind of difficult to talk in terms of beliefs. Like, do I know that there are previous lives? And I don't know that, but I don't have a better explanation for all sorts of things, like why it is that I can play the piano the way I do. It's not to do with anything to do with this lifetime, where, my body's playing the piano and composing, and there's a part of me going, oh, this is fabulous, but it certainly knows it's not coming from me. Right. And then similarly, the stuff to do with the counselling and these ways of working similarly didn't come from me.
But that sounds like that's the storytelling, or that's the part of us that wants to know, and that's the apparent separated self, which there isn't one. But that's the brain kind of creating trying to explain what cannot be explained, the unknown, really. That's what comes to me. And when you talk about experience, it's a realization, really. That's what also seems to be, from my perspective. It's not even a knowing, cannot be known anyway, so it can only be realized. It doesn't mean no one can really find by seeking. It seems just happens too, like life itself. So it's a realization that this is magic at play. This is, unconditional love is the closest words that I can describe this as. But it's not something that's definite, or it's just words. It is not an experience. It cannot be an experience, because to experience you have to be someone is experiencing, knowing something. So if there's no one there, then there's just life left. The unknown. I can talk to you forever about these things. For I go on and on and on. So talk to me about your work, David. You wrote the ebook titled Healing Inner Conflict, The Purpose Behind Behaviours We Regret and What to Do About It. So talk to me about what is your approach about, which I have read and I find it fascinating, especially because you use that component of unconditional love. So Healing Inner Conflict, HIC.
This is something that was actually taught to me by clients. I live in a small town of about 7,000 people, and these people who deal with multiple personalities and dissociative identities ended up basically saying, look, you have to help us. And I said, I don't know how to help you. And they said, well, then no one else is, so you better learn. And that's kind of what happened. And they basically showed me that dissociation is a function, that X amount of trauma requires X amount of dissociation as we kind of go through childhood. And there's a dependent stage of childhood where our reptilian brain is set to keep us in the next moment of evolution. And that's very different to later on when we've got a neocortex that's interested in well-being. So the process of having to comply with whatever it is that's expected of us when we're dependent on parents or carers creates this duality between what it is we want to do and what it is that we have to do so that they keep feeding us the next day. And when there's extreme trauma, that just becomes more extreme. And so we have to dissociate in order to be able to do the job properly of complying and getting into the next moment of evolution, which of course is at the cost of our expression of how we'd like to be. What was also going on is I was also seeing clients who were not dealing with extreme trauma. And what I noticed was everybody does the same stuff. The people with more extreme trauma just do it more extremely. They just dissociate more. And then over time, it just became clear that there were 4 mechanisms that everybody uses. And it kind of took things from the kind of symptomatic medicine way of, oh, this is a problem and how do we get rid of the problem, to this is the human condition. These are the stages we go through. These are the mechanisms that we do to get through, to get by. And then eventually what evolved was a way to intervene with them, and that's the unconditional love, which is when you're able to see the whole picture and yourself in it, and I mean small self there,
right.
Then you can see that there's nothing going wrong. There's just this grand process of evolution that we happen to play a little part in. But of course, as you and I are finding out of, the talking about it and the noticing it as opposed to the just experiencing it, I think, if you and I were in our experiences of unconditional love, we'd have half an hour of profound silence.
Yes. It could, it could. Includes everything, silence and non-silence, right?
But what I found fascinating about, even deciding to call it healing in a conflict, is the simplicity that just became really clear that there are only 4 types of disturbing behaviours, and they match the developmental stages of becoming a human, and they're really simple. And when I started off in counselling, I never imagined that it would be simple. Then to kind of notice, okay, so there's only these 4 things. There's a child, what a child does, which is internal override or criticism. There's what we do as an adolescent, which is external override or external criticism. There's what we do as an adult, which is to override the adolescent, acting out, externally criticizing because we've got jobs and relationships. And then we've got self-distraction or self-medication, because when you've got 3 other levels of override, we tend not to be a happy camper at the end of the day, and we want to drink or something to distract us, a screen, but then to just notice and be able to show people literally in a first session, this is the mechanism that is being dealt with here, and that there's a way of dealing with that, that's to bring unconditional love, as in there's nothing going wrong, it's an evolution, it's a healing trying to happen in exactly the same way that physical pain does that. We don't like it, but it knocks on the door and it forces our attention on that which needs healing. Of course, in our culture, we tend to try to avoid that like the plague, but it's exactly the same in the internal realm, that these feelings, these disturbances are knocking on the door, forcing our attention on that which needs emotionally healing. And this was a really huge turnaround from the bell curve of normality to this is a process that's completely part of life, and that all that's required is a relationship to it that understands that doesn't make anyone immediately perfect, or it doesn't happen. It just means that, I guess, the highest accolade you can get in my room is where you realize that you're just a work in progress, which of course for me I notice is the same whether it's to do with your physical incarnation or your spiritual incarnation.
I love the way you call it in a book. You call it natural. You say the main purpose of the understanding about the nature of the process of creation is the potential realization that on a certain level, nothing matters as an individual. Now, at least part of us can relax, you say. So it caught my attention the way you phrased this about the natural process, which is going back to nature as a reference, that we are nature, not apart from nature. And then nothing really matters from that perspective, right? Is from the individual perspective. It doesn't stop the processes from still happening. And that's where your work enlightens. It can be very helpful because we do need practices, I would say, but not in the sense of trying. Yeah, I really don't believe in the idea of trying or the choice, that we have a choice, but just kind of navigating the responses of the processes, of natural processes of this happening as life itself. Not sure if that's clear, but...
Well, for me, I would just describe the same thing as the in-breath and the out-breath of awareness, where, you'd know from your own life, you're born, and it's only as you look back, you can see at a certain point in time, you wake up to a level of awareness that allows you a level of freedom. And for me, there's, in the same way that we go to sleep or we wake up the next morning, I think the same happens in our spiritual evolution where, we wake up and fall asleep, and, I'm a very flawed individual and I forget unconditional love many times a day. I think what's graceful is my ability to come back to it, and noticing, what a blessing that is, because of course in my work, you can imagine I work with a lot of people who have nothing to come back to. Yeah. And, you'd be aware there's a tendency, I mean, I'm remembering, Ram Dass talking about first you have to go into somebody training before you can go into nobody training. Because we get into I'm a somebody, before you realize actually, you're a nobody. But, this is I think the divine Leela or play that is possible when there's some level of awakening. But it's also very easy to get attached to the awakening, and then you get very disappointed when it disappears and you go home for Christmas and your in-laws are giving you curry. But for me, it's just that in-breath and out-breath of remembering and forgetting and remembering and forgetting, that on a certain level, your podcasts, help us all remember. And I guess the healing in a conflict stuff, like I never imagined that there would be a crossover between my counselling work and my spiritual experience of unconditional love. So that's been so, there isn't words to describe it.
Natural. That sounds like natural to me.
The natural progression. And I guess for me, that's been the grace of meeting Ram Dass, ending up with a relationship with Neem Karoli Baba, having an experience of unconditional love that my rational mind will never understand, because I never met Neem Karoli Baba in form. So my rational mind goes, how can you even have this relationship? And yet there's the experience. And then noticing that the experience informs all the work that I've been doing. And then it's like, well, was it my work, or is it his work, or is it evolution's work, or the grand play where we're all just instruments of the grand process? But to be able to bring this to a construction worker who's walked into my office, and a couple of hours later for him to have the awareness, oh my God, this is just the human condition. There's nothing wrong with me. This is something trying to go right. When you see the relief and you experience that sense of freedom from the beginning of the session, which is, I'm a screwed unit, there's something wrong with me. It's so fulfilling to see this simplicity playing itself out. And not that anything miraculous happens. We have to practice this stuff. But when you get to the point where you realize it doesn't matter how much you practice or not, who you are is beyond that, then the coming and going between the mortal and the spiritual is just a dance.
Of the same thing, same music, yes, dancing the same music. Your work, do you offer online sessions or it's only in person?
Well, interestingly enough, I'm retired. I still do supervision, and I will still be doing training. And I've trained people to be able to counsel using healing in a conflict principles, and I'll be continuing that next year. But in terms of face-to-face counselling, I'm kind of scaled back. It's my stage of life is to help others learn how to do that, and certainly there's a few of my students who are in the process of turning it into an accredited course.
And also, please give us the website. What is the website to learn more about what you do, your work?
Sure. It's healinginnerconflict.com.au.
Okay, so I'll have that link on your podcast profile too. And we're almost at the end. There's something that I read on your ebook. You say, I believe, like a parent, the process of creation encourages the process to flourish or loves the creation just because it exists, not for what it does, achieves, or doesn't. It just encourages the process to flourish. Love is the process itself, whatever happens. I love that. I mean, that goes back to the main message.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what's behind the way of working. And in the same way that you and I struggle to talk about this in a podcast, writing that, was very much a separate part to the rest of the book that was quite technical in terms of, okay, this is how to do this sort of counselling. But it's usually not that useful to begin when someone's walking in and they've got a broken leg or a broken heart to say, well, it's all just fabulous, because they go, no, this is...
Wait a minute,
But to be able to have that as the basis, and as I'm teaching people to use this way of working, once they've got that, the essence of what you were just reading, that pervades the rest of the work. And you can actually see when a client gets that, as they drop into a space that isn't part of their physical life process. And when they experience what you and I are talking about, when they experience that something that can't be described, that's beyond their physical life process, it's like a mind once stretched can never go back to its original shape.
Yeah.
Then it's just a matter of ways of making that happen more and more.
And then if we just knew that this is it, this is the destination, the journey, everything. This moment, which is not even a moment, it's not time, it's just we become the moment.
Yeah. And that process of getting to the place where you become the moment, where you become life, where you become love, where you become what I would call part of the universe in the totality of it, as well as in relationship with your momentary incarnation, then at this point, there is nothing to do.
Yeah.
But what we all experience is that as we come into a body, it takes us a while to get there.
Yeah.
And then there's the processes of remembering it and forgetting it and remembering and forgetting it. And the awareness that it's grace that allows that process to happen. And I actually have a sense that it's only a matter of time, and it's only a matter of the universe playing with itself. Like, I'm fascinated by the lemniscate, the infinity symbol, which is this one thing that's twisted that makes it look like two, but it's actually one.
Yeah.
And I think that's the dance that we're all in, where we're in a sense of duality because we're in the limited body, and there's a part of us that can see the wholeness. But then there's pretty much what you and I are doing right now, which is bringing that, and as people listen to this, it's bringing them back to that in the same way that I do that through the day, where I forget, I stub my toe and I swear, and then I come back to that it's all just part of the process. And it's the remembering and the forgetting. The healing in a conflict was just a method because I happened to be a counsellor that got funneled through and became something simple that people could use to remember that in their day-to-day lives.
And we're almost at the end. In your book, I also love the interesting correlation to external conflict resolution. That part of your book also caught my attention. The win-win approach, creative response, empathy, appropriate assertiveness. I mean, this is golden wisdom.
I was lucky enough in the earlier part of my personal development training to have Helena Cornelius teach me, and it was her and her mother and I think Shoshana Fair, who started the conflict resolution network. And yeah, it was interesting later on to see the correlation between conflict resolution and healing in a conflict. But that, in its essence, all of these ways of approaching, they all come from the same place. They're just kind of different versions of it, in the same way that, you and I come from the same place, but with different versions of it. And that's the beauty of it is, if there was an issue of our time, it's how does diversity coexist? Mm. And I think that's the evolution that we're going through, in the same way that, for me, as a species, we're going through an adolescence. We've gone through our, walking, going on, not having much consciousness, being on all fours and crawling around, and then starting to stand up and starting to group. And, now I think we're in the shop till you drop and put all the rubbish under the bed, in the same way that adolescents do. And that's just where we're up to as a species. And, the person who's the most muscly in the schoolyard, is the one. But I also see that, we'll get through this, and we'll get into adulthood and old age, but we have to kind of have an unconditionally loving relationship with our own individual process and the process that the whole species is going through, and who's awake and who's not awake. But it's a bit like puberty. Someone gets puberty early, someone gets it late, but everyone's going to get it,
So I have a few more questions for you, the ending questions. Would you like to add anything or read a passage in your book?
Yeah, I'm happy to read just the last passage in the book. I believe, like a parent, the process of creation encourages the process to flourish, or loves the creation just because it exists, not for what it does, achieves, or doesn't. It just encourages the process to flourish, loves the process itself, whatever happens. What are you going to do when you realize that you are the most advanced version of your line, dating back to the beginning of life as we know it? When you've realized this, it doesn't matter what you do. There is a great freedom that comes from this understanding when and if you notice it as your own personal experience, which is the only proof you need. In summary, you've got the most amazing piece of biotechnology to run around in for a lifetime, however long that might be. You are the most sophisticated version of your line of creation ever, and you've got an unknown but definitely limited period of time to play with it in a playground that only can be described as miraculous beyond comprehension. As Einstein pointed out, every realm is relative or interconnected with every other realm, and the degree to which we develop a relationship with our place in that realm, the more we can become collaborators in that process. When we realize that by bringing healing to our own insensitivities, by bringing healing to our internal relationships, then we have the best chance of healing our external relationships. Is there anyone who doesn't want themselves and their children to live in a more and more sensitive world?
I love that question. Yeah, the answer is so obvious. Thank you again, David. So my last questions to you. What is another word for power?
The ability to be in relationship with the force of the universe that flows through everything.
And my last question is, what are 3 things about life you know for sure as of this moment?
That love is what exists between everything, that our physical life is short and our spiritual life is never ending, and as I say to my kids, make sure you enjoy at least part of your day.
Thank you so much again for your presence, the wisdom that flows through you, which I call timeless wisdom, and everything else in between that can be felt. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Valeria.
Bye for now. Take good care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about David Bhakti Gotlieb and his work, please visit healinginnerconflict.com.au.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.